No, you can't walk. First, you can't walk a block.
Yeah,
Okay.
when you're up until 2:30, it's too much.
Okay, we're going to start right on top of Daf Dalet, Aleph. We thank Hashem that we're able to learn Torah every day. It's less of our learning we should have. Beis Hamikdash immediately, also we're learning for Shleima, one that needs my father, and for Naftali ben Menucha Bela. Gemara starts like this: Minalan. Where do we know the Binan Zvicha Lishma that when you slaughter a sacrifice, you need to slaughter it for the right intentions? Right, that's what we're learning over here. That if you have intention, one sacrifice, you have intention that you're bringing it for another sacrifice, it's possible that it's invalid if it's a chatas or if it's a carbon pesach. And either way, even if it's a different carbon, it still doesn't satisfy the obligation on the owner, even if the sacrifice is valid. The Gemara answers, "Damakrav im zevach shlamim karbonei." Pasuk says that if a sacrifice of a peace offering is a sacrifice, which means shetei zvicha l'shem shlamim. You see the word zevach, which means a sacrifice, means slaughtering. So it's the type of slaughtering of a sacrifice. It's another word for shchita. Zvicha. It's another word for shchita. So, by the way, the word zvachim, that's the name of our Masechta, is sacrifice, and also means the slaughtering of a sacrifice, not just the sacrifice. I guess the word sacrifice means like
To sacrifice.
the sacrifice means the word. So this tells us, the word zevach tells us that you have to shecht it in order to, with the intention that it's a shlama and peace offering. V'dil mahaynu shmaya. This is 1 second. Maybe it's just a noun. Zevach shlamim. What do they call that? A adjectival something. That it's the mix. It's the two words together of the noun with its adjective. Zevach shlamim. The sacrifice of a shlamim. So, midiksiv, since the pasuk says hamakar v'sdama shlamim, hazerik v'sdama shlamim, since we have other sources in the Torah where it doesn't call it zevach shlamim, it calls it the blood of the shlamim, which means it didn't say the blood of the zevach shlamim, which means that zevach doesn't have to be its name. Zevach could mean the verb, the slaughtering of. Like ksiv zevach, v'hacha ksiv zevach, and here it does say zevach. Shema mina shetei zvicha l'shem shlamim. We see from this that the slaughtering has to be for the sake of a shlamim. Ashkan zvicha. So we figured out the source that slaughtering needs to be for the sake of the sacrifice. Shara v'edus minala. How do we know the other services as well? We didn't really get into this yet, but there are other fundamental services of a sacrifice. First one is to slaughter it. Second one is to catch the blood in a container, which the kohen has to do. The third one is to sprinkle the blood, and the fourth one is to bring the limbs up to the altar. It's called Shchita, Zrika, Shchita, Kabbalah, Zrika, and Halacha. Halacha means to bring it up. So far we have that Shchita, which we called here Zricha, needs to be done lishma, for the intention of this sacrifice. Sharabayis minalan. What about the other services that are critical for the sacrifice? It says v'chitei malei lefnul zvicha. Oh, we'll learn it from the precedent. We have it by Zvicha. We have it by Shchita. We learned by Shchita needs to be done for the right intention, so to the other ones. Where it says 1 second. That's not necessarily so, because Mal Zvicha shekein nifs l'shleil shemechlim Pesach. It's a very interesting halacha that if someone slaughters a carbon Pesach, and he doesn't have an intention for the people that are going to be able to eat a kazayas, he only has intention for elderly or the ill that are there. So it says, "Ish lefi achlei tachaisu alaseh." You have to, tachaisu means to slaughter. You have to slaughter it with intention of the people that are going to be able to eat a kazayas. And if you don't slaughter it for them, so then the Pesach could be invalid. So if that's the case, that means that there's a stringency in slaughtering over the other services. So how could you tell me that it, just like we find by the slaughtering, that it needs to be done lishma, so to the other services? No, there's a stringency by the slaughtering that doesn't apply to the other services, and that's by the Korban Pesach. You need to have the people that are going to be able to eat a kazayas in mind. So we're going to need a different source for the other services of the sacrifice that they need to be done lishma. The pasuk says, "Hamakir v'stam ashlamim," the one that brings the blood of the offering, and should take kabbalah l'shem shlamim. This teaches me that the receiving of the blood needs to be done for the sake of a shlamim. That's what we're learning from Hamakriv, the one that brings it, that offers it, is referring to the receiving of the blood. As we have a Gemara somewhere that says "V'hikrivai," and he will bring it. That's referring to the receiving of the blood. The Gemara says, okay. So why did we need to say it by shchita? We could have only said it by Kabbalah, by the receiving of the blood, and we would have learned out that just like by the Kabbalah needs to be done lishma, so to the shchita needs to be done lishma. We could have learned it the opposite of the way we were doing it. It says Mishum Dikla Mifrach, because if you would do that, then we would have another question. Mala Kabbalah Shkem Psula Bazar. Ooh, Ve'isha. Interesting point over here. That apparently the shchita could be done by a non-Kohen, and apparently it could be done by a woman. Now, I know the Shita Mikubetzes deletes that. Did you see that?
Yeah.
But but I'm not sure if all the commentaries do that. So apparently the shchita could be done by a woman. What did we learn in beginning of Chulin?
I thought
we learned that a woman
did,
can do shchita.
because I remember we're saying, and then we said, wait a minute, the women run our kitchen. They do everything in there anyway. You have to stay out of their kitchen.
Right.
I think that's
We learned in the first mission of Chulin that a woman can do shchita. We didn't learn that by a karban, but whatever the case is, we do know that by a karban you don't need a kayin. That you remember from the Gemara Brachas. Remember with Shmuel, he was running around and they were running around looking for a kayin. And Shmuel was 2-3 years old. His mother brought him and he said, "What are you doing?" He says, "Looking for a kayin." He says, "You don't need a kayin." It says in the pasuk, "V'zarak kayin." It doesn't say v'shachat kayin. It just says v'shachat. It means shchita ksher bizar. So that's when it's Erev Rosh Hashanah. So that's when Eli says, "You're right, but Meir halacha b'fnei Rabbi is chayiv misa." So Hannah says, "No. This is Alanaras Spalalti. Don't worry, I'll give you another son." He says, "No, Alanaras says this is the one that I davened for. I don't want another son. Not I don't want another son, but I want this one." Okay, so we can't learn from Kabbalah, because Kabbalah is much stricter than shchita. Maybe Kabbalah needs to be lishma, but not shchita. There's ashkan shchita v'Kabbalah. Okay, so now what we have is a source by shchita, slaughtering, and Kabbalah that it needs to be done lishma. Zrika minalan. How do we know that the sprinkling of the blood needs to be done lishma? V'chitem alelef mihani. We'll learn from the two that we have already. That would be a precedent, right? And it would be a mahatzad. Usually, when you're learning from one to another, then it's called a binyanav or a mamatzino. We say in Rabbi Shmuel Eimer, binyanav. Binyanav means that we have a precedent. Then it's also called in the Gemara, it's called a mamatzino, just like we find by this, so too by that. But when I have two things and I'm looking for a common denominator, common factor in those two things, which will apply to the third, that's called a mamatzino, just like we find over here by those. So the tzad hashavah, when you use the tzad hashavah, it's called a mamatzino. So just like I find by those, so to this, and so just like I find by shchita and Kabbalah, so to zrika. The zrika means to sprinkle. Malahani, you can't learn from a ma'atzad, because malahani shekain to unes tzaf and v'yashtem b'chatas apnimis. The shchita and the Kabbalah, the slaughtering and the receiving of the blood need to be done on the north side of the altar, north side of the courtyard. If it's a holy sacrifice, and also the slaughtering and the catching of the blood applies to even the sacrifices that are brought inside the sanctuary, but it doesn't. But the sprinkling of the blood outside outside on the outside altar, that doesn't apply. So I could say that maybe these two are different than the sprinkling of the blood. Pasuk says, one that sprinkles the blood of the peace offering. That means to tell me, why does it have to say peace offering? We know what we're talking about. It says, coming to teach me that the sprinkling of the blood needs to be done for the sake of the offering. So why do it has the same pattern? I could say it just by the zrika, and I'll learn it the opposite, that the other three, I'll learn it out from the zrika. It says, Misham Dechkel Mifrach, because we can ask a question. Mal zrika shkin chayav le'azar misa. There's a chiv misa, a death penalty by the hands of heaven, if a non-Kohen sprinkles the blood. Now, even though receiving the blood and walking the limbs up to the altar is not allowed to be done by a non-Kohen, but it doesn't mean that there's a death penalty there. Okay. Ashkan Kulu. We now have everything, right? We have Shchita, Kabbalah, and Zrika. Halacha minalan. What about halacha? Now, do they translate halacha as walking the limbs or walking the blood to the altar? Huh? Conveying? Conveying what? The limbs or the blood? Halacha. Where do we know that way of conveying the blood of the shlam to the altar? For the sake of the shlam. So it's conveying the blood, not the limbs. I kept translating as conveying the limbs. So halacha, how do we know that bringing the blood to the altar is also needs to be done l'shma? Just those steps, taking those steps need to be done l'shma. Well, we'll learn it with the ma'atzad from all the other ones, right? Once you have three, then you for sure look for the common factor. It says malakulu shekein avida sheyef shalavatla tem beilach sheyef shalavatla. The other three are impossible to get around, but this one is possible to get around. Why? Because if you happen to slaughter it close enough to the altar that you don't need to convey it, you don't need to walk it up there, because you're close enough to sprinkle it from where you're standing, then you don't have halacha. So maybe halacha does not need to be done lishma.
So it's not shechted on the.
No, it's everything shechted on the ground.
Always.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just the spritzing goes on.
And then the burning of the fats and limbs. Elamerkra, so the pasuk says, "V'hikr v'sakola misbeicha," that he offers everything on the altar. Omer Mar, and the master taught in a brisa says that zu helachas evarim lekeves. This is bringing the limbs to the altar. Bitanya, and it was taught in a brisa. V'krivu zu kabbalah sadam, and they will bring it. This is the receiving of the blood. V'apich rachmana b'lashon halacha, and the Torah calls receiving the blood with an expression of conveying it. Bring it up. To tell me that halacha does not leave the status of Kabbalah, and which means that it needs to be done the same way that the Kabbalah needs to be done. Yeah, that's the pshat. Where's that pencil? See it. Okay. Now the Gemara says, we've just finished an entire category here of Shina Kodesh. If someone changes, you're not allowed to change the sacrifice from one to another while you're doing any of these four services. The Shechita, the Kabbalah, the Zrika, or the Halacha. Now we're going to go into the next issue of changing not the type of sacrifice, but changing the owner. Let's say he has the wrong owner in mind, the intention for a different person when he's bringing the sacrifice. And now we're going to have to go through each of the services.
Like he shechted it for one person and he sprayed it for another person.
Right. All right. We said before that there are 6 things that the sacrifices that you have to have in mind. One of them is that it has to be for the right sacrifice. The other one is that it has to be for the right right person that's bringing it. So Amar of Pinchas, brother of Ami, Amar Kra. Pinchas, the son of Rav Ami, says we have a pasuk that's a source for this. Besar zevach teida shlama. In the meat of the sacrifice of the taida, this is the taida offering is the Thanksgiving offering, shlama of his peace offering. So says zevach teida shlama. There's vichal l'shem taida, that it needs to be slaughtered for the sake of a carbon taida. And 1 second, we already said before that we need to slaughter the sacrifice for the right sacrifice. Now you're telling it to me again by the carbon taida. So the Gemara says out, well, if we don't need it to teach me Shina Kaidesh, that you can't change sacrifices in intention. So the Nafkalan Mihasam, because we learned it from over there. Well, it's over there, the Damashlamim, right? Zevach Hashlamim. So Tanayuin Lashina Bailim. So we're going to bring it over to tell me this is called the Vim in a Union. You don't need it for this, we can use it for what we do need it for. And it's going to teach me that you can't change owners that have the wrong intention of the different owner.
How many altogether rights?
Rights? What do you mean rights?
The right this, the right that. The right
there's
person.
six. There's six.
It's in nursing. We have no, but to remember they have the 5 rights they have to memorize when they give a drug: the right patient, the right drug, the right dose, the right route of administration, and the right time. Because otherwise they give the wrong drug.
Amazing.
And they still make mistakes.
There's 5 fingers to keep your mouth.
Whoa, that's pretty amazing.
No, it sounds very similar. You have to remember.
This is the doctors have to remember that.
That's for the nurses.
The nurses.
Talmudic teacher.
Yeah. And this, you want to say that this pasuk, besides Zevach Teida Shlamav, this is coming to teach me that you have to have the right intention for that. We need this pasuk to teach me something else. Besides Zevach Teida Shlamav, it says that the meat of the sacrifice of the carbon taida, Abachananai Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, Balilmaid Taida Sheshachta L'Shem Shlamim, Lamed maybe, Taida Shachta L'Shem Shlamim, Kshera Shlam Shachta L'Shem Taida Psula. That a carbon taida that's brought for the sake of a shlam, a carbon taida is really a shlamim. Only thing is, there's 2 differences. One is that the time to eat it is less. You only have 1 day, 1 day and night, not 2 days and 1 night, like a regular shlamim. And also it comes along with bread, with matzah, but it comes along with these loaves. So maybe 10 of them were chametz, I think 30 of them were matzah. But whatever the case is, if you slaughter a sacrifice for the sake of a shlamim, it's kosher. But if you slaughter a shlamim for the sake of a taida, then it's going to be pasul. So we have a source. In other words, the source that you thought is going to teach me that you can't change owners is actually teaching me something very significant, and you can't use it for that. My hefresh bein zelazeh. What's the difference between this and that? The taida and the shlamim, that it works one way, it's a one-way valve. You can only use it. The taida could be brought as a shlamim, but a shlamim can't be brought as a taida. Taida kriya shlamim, shlamim kriya taida. Because the taida is called the peace offering, but the peace offering is not called the Thanksgiving offering. So the Gemara answers our problem that you've used it already. Anan mizevach kamrinan. 1 second. Abachanan, in the name of Rabbi Lezer, was using the Taida Shlamav to teach me his halacha. We're going to the beginning of the pasuk and we're using the word Zevach to teach us our halacha. So we quoted 4 words and we said you were using those words already. It's not actually accurate. We're using 2 of them, but there's another 2 that we can use for our lima. Rakati mi boile, but we still have we're going to need katas v'yasham minayin. How do we know that a carbon chatas or a carbon asham, that it needs to be brought for the right owner? Hamalemer Zevach comes to teach us Zevach. So the pasuk of Zevach, Besar Zevach, is going to teach me Chatas Vashim. I thought Chatas
Not
Vashim
for
was.
the right on, it says maybe in front.
Oh, really? Okay, so that's going back on the brisa itself. Huh. Oh, okay. So here's the problem. I get it. I didn't read it right. So it says, 1 second. We still need the pasuk of Zevach because the pasuk of Zevach teaches me that a chatas in Asham can only be eaten for 1 day. How do we know chatas Asham? Talmud Leimer Zevach. So you're using the word Zevach also. You thought that the word Zevach was extra. The word Zevach isn't extra. Thank you, Dr. Stein. Im Kain, the Gemara says, Nichtiv Kra, Ubesar Teidash Lamav. Zevach. Besides Teidash Lamav Zevach. My Zevach. Why do we have to say Zevach where it says it? Zevach Teidash Lamav. Shmamina Tarti. So tell me that I can learn 2 things from here. One is, I'm going to learn that you have to have the right owner in mind, and also I'm going to learn that the chatas and asham only have 1 day. Ashkan zvicha. You learned the first thing, that it need to have the right owner, the intention for the right owner. Sharavidis minalan. But how do we know that the other services need to have the right owner as well? Okay, we'll learn from the shchita. It says no, you can't learn from shchita. We tried that before on the top of the page. We have a special halacha that when it comes to slaughtering a korban pesach, that if you have in mind for someone that can't eat the kazayas, it's invalid. The Gemara says nemer zvicha b'shina kodesh and nemer zvicha b'shina bailam. We can learn from the shchita, the halachas that we learned by shchita. If someone were to change sacrifices, we'll learn from that also that if someone were to change owners. Just like by Shina Kodesh means changing which sacrifice it is, that if it doesn't matter if it's Shchita or if it's the other services, you can't change that. You can't change the sacrifice. So too, when it comes to Shina Bailim, we're going to say that Zvicha and other Avodas is the same. The slaughtering and the other services are the same. You can't switch owners, just like you can't switch sacrifices. Ikal Mifrach, 2nd. Mala Shina Kodesh. When it comes to Shina Kodesh, can Psula Begufa. It's if you change sacrifice, it becomes inherently puzzle. Okay. Turns out that the main service that you need to have intention for the owner is by the sprinkling of the blood. But it doesn't have to be specifically sprinkling of the blood. You have to have intention that you're going to sprinkle the blood for the owner. So when you're slaughtering, you have intention that you're going to sprinkle the blood for the owner. When you're catching the blood, you have intention that you're going to sprinkle the blood for the. But everything is associated with the sprinkling of the blood for the intention with this owner in mind. The other concern we had on the top of the page was that not that it was for the owner, it was for you're going to change the sacrifice. Changing the sacrifice did not have to involve the sprinkling of the blood. Even if you're just slaughtering it, forget about sprinkling. I'm slaughtering this for a korban that's not the same as the one that is supposed to be brought for. So we're going to say, how can you learn that Shinei Kodesh is going to teach changing the sacrifice? It's now going to teach me about changing the owner. Changing the sacrifice has a different halacha than changing the owner, because by changing the owner, having the wrong owner, you have to it has to be associated with the sprinkling of the blood in order for it to be invalid.
The same Cohen that's slaughtering and sprinkling. It's the same guy, or
Could be not.
they both have to know.
Yeah. Everybody's They get a group chat on the it says on the WhatsApp.
So you have a whiteboard.
Well, now what we're saying is that there's a difference between Shina Kodesh, changing of the sacrifice, to changing of the owner when it comes to these four. Because when it comes to changing the owner, it has to be associated with the sprinkling of the blood. No, it's nothing to do with that.
It's sprinkling from the cone cup, right?
They would catch the blood and sprinkle the blood on the altar. Now, you're talking about when you cover the blood of a bird. Yeah, it's only by a bird. It's just it's something else. I don't know how if they did that on the in the temple. I don't know if they did that in the temple. Okay. So we're saying Malashina Kodesh, you can't compare Shina Kodesh to Shinu Bailam, to changing the owner. Psula Begufa, because this is inherently, we have to see what the Gemara is going to explain that. And also it applies to the four Abaydas, independently of Zrika, right? Yeshin Lachamisa, and if someone designates a sacrifice and then he passes away, and his inheritor brings the sacrifice, he can still mess it up by having the wrong sacrifice in mind. But he can't mess it up for having the wrong owner in mind because the owner's not alive anymore. And also you can have the wrong sacrifice in mind by a carbon seaver, but you can't have the wrong owner in mind by a carbon seaver, by a community sacrifice, because everyone is its owner. The Yeshin B'tzibur could be it applies to community just like the individual. Okay, now, so you can't learn Shina Kodesh over to Shina Bailam. It says Rafagav the Tarti Lav Dafka, even though two of these are not specifically are not necessarily so, two of the four things that we just said. However, Tarti Mia Dafka, but two of them are definitely so. We're going to see soon that are specific, and therefore we can't learn one from the other. Now the Gemara says, Maishna Shina Bailam. When it comes to Shina Bailam, changing of the owner, which is not inherently possible, Machshava Ba'alma is just by a mere thought. Shina Kodesh Nami Machshava Ba'alma. Let me see how it translates this. Shina Kodesh would be change of holiness, okay? Are we holding 4b? Okay. The Gemara explains why the two distinctions are not precise. We're explaining why two of them are. So it says, what is different about the deviation with regard to the owner, such that its disqualification does not concern the offering itself? It is that this merely constitutes a change of thought. Deviation from the type of offering is also okay. We start off saying that the whole that shinoi bailim is not. Why isn't shinoi bailim not psula begufay? Why is it not inherently invalid? Okay, and the Gemara answers because it's machshava ba'alma, because it's just a thought. The Gemara says, well, that's not true because shinoi kodesh not machshava ba'alma. Change of holiness is also just a thought. Elakivan da achshava pasla. Rather, once he has the thought, it automatically invalidates it right from the thought itself. So, it says, but 1 second, so it's really the same thing. And according to Rav Pinchas, Breder of Mari, he says that Yeshini Bailam, that there's a possibility of changing the owner even after the death. He says, So Taitimi Ekel Mifrach, but nevertheless, we still have the two questions that we can't compare the Shinoi Kodesh to Shinoi Bailam because they're different. I don't think we got Psule B'Gufay. Did the Gemara come out? The Gemara now says, Ella Amar Ravashi, rather Ravashi says that to change from one owner to another owner is Amar Kra, the pasuk says, V'nirtza loy l'chaper alav. It'll be accepted for him, and like an appeasement for him, to atone for him. That it atones only for the owner, and it can't be for another. V'lei al chaveirei. So we learn it from a pasuk that the owner, that you need to have intention for this owner. That's going to be our source. But it's funny that the Gemara didn't go back and tell me all the problems. Now, okay, the Gemara says, you want to tell me that pasuk is coming to teach me, is coming to tell me that you can't change owners when it comes to the zrika, right? The sprinkling. We need it for something else. You have already used that pasuk. You can't use it for two things. It says, that'll be appeasement for him, and it would be an atonement for him. Only if it's alav, only if he had accepted on himself as a personal obligation to bring the offering, then he's going to be responsible for it. That we called it a neder, right? A neder, as opposed to nedava, which was he was not responsible. But if he just consecrates the animal, he doesn't accept on himself a responsibility to bring a animal, he just has a responsibility to bring this one, so then he's not responsible for it. So we learned the B'nitzler L'chaper Alav to teach me something else. Now you're telling me it's coming to teach me you can't change owners. From Yitzchak Bar Avdimi, my timer, what's the reason? Once he says that it's upon me to bring the offering, then it's as if it's on his shoulders, and he's not freed from his obligation until he brings an offering. Ravashi, the Gemara answers, there's four words there. You're telling me that one of those words was needed for something else. So what? Three of them are not needed for that, and Ravashi can learn from those three. Ashkechan Zvicha Uzrika. Oh, okay. So let's leave it over here. We're holding by Ashkechan Zvicha Uzrika. Yeah, go down to. By us, it's two dots. On the traditional Gemara, there's two dots there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Continue Thursday.
Good year, everyone.
Amen. You too.
We're gonna run.
Yeah.